January 2018. The first thing I noticed was wrong was the power going out. Where's the power gone? The backup generator came on pretty quickly though, so I wasn't too worried. It was a nice day, and there was no rain or snow, so I wasn't sure why the power went out. I figured it had something to do with the town cutting back power to save electricity, but then I realized that would be dumb. I went downstairs to see if the power had come back on there too. When I entered the living room, Richard was turning the TV back on. That's when something weird happened. The TV had some weird message on it, and a weird electronic sound was playing while a computerized voice spoke. This is a United States emergency announcement. It was kind of creepy. I figured there must have been some sort of hurricane or earthquake or something. But when the program on the TV came back on, these were saying something different. Apparently, multiple large explosions had been reported in cities throughout the country. Although nothing was certain, several witnesses had reported seeing mushroom clouds. Many people suspected the attacks were nuclear. There was a list of cities where there had been explosions, with a new name being announced every once in a while. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, even Kinney City, which was close to Plainview. An official from the government came on the TV a few minutes later. He said that the United States had been attacked by hidden nuclear bombs, about 10 kilotons for each bomb, whatever that means. The government was going to evacuate people from those areas around the cities affected by radiation, but much was unknown about the bombings, including who was responsible. They showed a picture of New York City and it didn't look that great. Thousands of people were feared dead, and more were probably injured. Roderick and I felt scared. Just then, we saw Mom and Mandy head outside. Roderick and I ran out to join them. There were a lot of people gathered on the street looking at something in the distance. I saw Fregley and Rowley further up the street too, and some other kids I recognized as well. Then I looked where everybody else was looking, and I knew my life would never be the same. Kinney City had been destroyed. Dad came home later that night. He was pretty shaken up and he was coming home from work in the city when the bomb went off. He managed to avoid the blast but didn't get far out enough to avoid the shockwave. He was cut up and burnt pretty bad. He had barely made it to Plainview alive, and when he got home he began feeling sick and exhausted. He went upstairs and stayed on his bed. Meanwhile, the government announced that Plainview's water and food supply had been contaminated by the nuclear bomb. The government said they would be bringing supplies into the town so that we could survive. They also announced that council for the refugees would be set up in Plainview. I was feeling nervous, and there was some more bad news. We found out Uncle Gary had been in Boston when it was destroyed, and we figured he was dead. Riley's uncle was in New York when it was bombed, and they guessed he was also dead. We held a little funeral for our Uncle Gary, and most of the street turned up to remember their own dead family and friends, which was kind of annoying, but I guess that wouldn't have been the right time to mention it. Dad was also feeling even more sick than he had when he got home, and his burns haven't gotten better. Meanwhile, some of his hair has begun to fall out, and he's not been able to move or talk to us. A neighbor who's a doctor came over for a bit to see him, and he said he probably had radiation poisoning. The first government airlift of supplies came that day, and the police and firefighters distributed the food and water to each household. It wasn't great, but I wasn't really planning on starving to death, so it was good to have food and water. February 2018. Dad died today. None of us were all that surprised. He wasn't in great shape, but we were all still really sad. I can't believe I'll never hear him tell me not to touch his Civil War models anymore. All I can say is, if there's going to be this much death over the next few months, I'm not exactly looking forward to it. The funeral parlor was backed up, so you had to bury him in the backyard. Riley's dad even came over to say some words. Since Mom's income from writing in the newspaper was much less than Dad's, Riley's dad told us that if there was anything we needed help with, we just had to ask him. I gotta say, I'm not too sure burying Dad in the back was the best idea. I don't like the idea of having a dead body under our yard, so I decided to do something about it. Of course, Mom stopped me before I could do anything. The first refugees from Kinney City arrived today. I have to say, they didn't look that great. Mom always says I can be anything I want to be when I grow up. After today, refugee isn't my top option. The government is building these survivor containment facilities called SCFs in public areas. Until they finish building those, they're gonna have all the refugees stay in tents in the public parks. Of course, there wasn't enough room for all the refugees in the park, so some of them started setting up camps in the forest, and some even set themselves up on the street. Meanwhile, the government still doesn't know who did the bombings, but Russia hasn't claimed responsibility, or North Korea. And given that the bombs would detonate on the ground, they think it's probably an act of nuclear terrorism. March 3rd, 2018. Life's not too much better. The airlifts have less and less supplies, and there's more people in Plainview, so they're giving less to the refugees. Speaking of the refugees, the first SCF opened last Friday. I have to say, it kind of looks cool. The mayor asked for people to go into the SCF to perform and cheer up the SCFs. Riley said we should do our magic routine, but he couldn't pay me $1 million to do that again. I think Roderick and his band performed for the refugees, and I have to say, it's kind of cruel making them sit through that. March 19th, 2018. School reopened today, for the first time since the bombing. None of the kids felt all that happy though. Pretty much everybody in the school had lost a friend or a relative. In algebra, our teacher wasn't even there because she died in the bombings, so we had a free period. It wasn't just our friends and family that had died though. Some kids were assumed to have died because they were in the city when it was bombed. Rise Addison had apparently died, and all the girls in the grade were going crazy. They had even set up a little shrine to him as a memorial, although to be fair, they had set up shrines to him even when he was still alive. We miss you, Bryce. Actually, there were little shrines and memorial all over the school that kids had set up for their friends, even the really unpopular ones. Everywhere you looked, there was a kid who died. I sat with Raleigh at lunch, and Albert told us that the government had actually done the bombings as a form of population control. But at that point, nobody wanted to hear it. Albert, man, just shut up. I went over to Sirag's house after school, and Raleigh was there too. I admit it. It was kind of nice hanging out with them, pretend everything was normal. But then after a while, Sirag's dad told us to put on the news. Apparently, the president had an announcement about the bombings. He said that they traced the bombings to an obscure Middle Eastern terrorist group, and that the army was focusing on how to attack them. March 20th, 2018. When I walked to school this morning, I wasn't expecting it to be anything but a normal day. At least, more for post-atom bombing America. The refugees were still camped out in the woods, and I heard some of the Mingo kids have been talking with them. Boy, would that be a strange conversation. The police department, although understaffed, was functioning again, and so were the garbage trucks. So the town was a lot safer and cleaner now. I heard those guys are getting paid next to nothing because their salary comes from the city, which had been bombed, so they're basically volunteering. I gotta admit, those guys are real heroes, and there was still that eerie sense of quiet. Anyway, my day changed when I got to school. After first period, history where our teacher just put on some old movie called Braveheart to cheer us up. I ran into Chirag and started talking to him for a while about the bombings. Chirag mentioned that they found the terrorist group in Tajikistan, a splinter group of the Taliban, which had somehow obtained nuclear weapons and detonated them by hiding them inside vans which were parked inside the cities. The US was about to launch an attack on the group with the help of several countries, including Tajikistan. Apparently, Chirag's dad, who worked at the Pentagon, managed to convince one of the top generals not to attack North Korea, who they thought was responsible. I gotta say, it's pretty cool that my classmate's dad prevented World War III. I gotta say, though, I wasn't happy that we had to go back to the Middle East for another war, mostly because I knew I'd have to learn about it in history, and believe me, the curriculum at Westmore is already long enough as it is now. I was about to ask Chirag if his dad had ever met Donald Trump when another kid came up to Chirag. I don't know his name, but I recognize him as one of the football team jocks. He was yelling at Chirag like he'd kill his family and called him a bunch of things that were too terrible for me to write down. But the gist of it was basically this: "Stupid terrorists, you ruined this good country. Get out of here." He called it some more things, which I'm not going to write, and walked away. I helped Chirag to his feet, but for some reason, Although he was angry, he didn't look all that surprised. He said the same thing had happened to his dad the other day, and that he never knew since it was announced that the terrorist was Arabic that this would happen. Well, I thought that was pretty dumb because Rog isn't Arabic for one thing, and for another thing, his dad is a hero to the country. He should be receiving medals for his service, but someone felt the need to call him a terrorist. That's when Chirag said something that changed my whole view, or my whole outlook on the bombings. These people don't want the facts. They want a scapegoat, someone to blame. By that I look the part to them. When people are scared, they try to make themselves feel safe by fighting the enemy, and that usually means the people don't look like them. You may think it's just a few people, but just wait. Soon it'll be the government trying to make it seem like they're making the country safer. I admit, I never thought about it like that, but Chirag couldn't be right. Maybe a few racists around the school. I know there's plenty, but not the government of the United States. Surely. Besides, didn't Dr. King get rid of racism?